In the world of video games, some titles become legends not for their success, but for their stories of ambition, delay, and controversy. Few games embody this better than Duke Nukem Forever, a title whose development spanned over a decade and became one of the most infamous sagas in gaming history. Announced in 1997, Duke Nukem Forever was intended to be a worthy follow up to the smash hit Duke Nukem 3D. Instead, it became a cautionary tale of shifting priorities, technological overhauls, and endless delays. When it finally released in 2011, the game carried the weight of over a decade of anticipation and a legacy that overshadowed the game itself. Today, we're diving into the long and winding story of Duke Nukem Forever, exploring its troubled development, polarizing reception, and the lessons it may have taught the gaming industry. So grab your bubblegum, brace for impact, and join us for today's explosive trip down memory card lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you well. Hello and welcome to the 250th. Yes, that is 250. We are at a milestone today. It's our 250th episode of our video game history podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week, we'll tell you a story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game or the people who have created it. It can be about a console or the technology that brought it to life. We often talk about the companies that bring it all together, making our hobby, video games, a reality. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the game, new about the topic. It's a game today. What it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world as its legacy. Geez Louise, you'd think that after 250 episodes, I would have that down pat, but I do not. Anyways, today we are diving into Duke Nukem Forever, the game that became a punchline for delays and development hell. Released in 2011 after almost 15 years of anticipation, it remains one of the more fascinating tales in gaming history, for better or for worse. I'm David Casson, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, who'd probably spend more time quoting Duke than actually saving the day. He's my brother, Rob Casson. Rob, do you think that you take forever saving the world, or perhaps you just grab a milkshake and call it a day?
Well, Dave, I already got all the boys in the yard, so you already know what that means.
Yeah, I know. I know. Oh, man. Oh, all right. Well, big, long story today. 15 years of a story today. So, got a lot to cover. Before we get there, though, why don't you share with our listeners what else has happened during this week in gaming history?
All right, well, kicking it off on June 11th, 1983, Capcom Co. Limited was officially established in Osaka, Japan, emerging from the earlier IRM Corporation as a developer and publisher of arcade video games. The name Capcom is derived from capsule computers, a term coined to describe their custom-built arcade machines. In its early years, Capcom made waves with hits like Vulgus and 1942, laying the groundwork for a legacy of iconic franchises. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, the company would go on to define entire genres with titles such as Mega Man, Street Fighter, and Resident Evil, earning a reputation for polished gameplay and memorable characters. With its strong focus on both arcade and home console development, Capcom became a global powerhouse, known for blending innovative mechanics with bold artistic direction. Today, it stands as one of the most influential studios in video game history, credited with shaping the medium across multiple generations.
Capcom is still a powerhouse today.
Indeed, they are continuing to shape gaming.
That they are. True statement.
On June 13th, 1997, Stainless Games and Interplay Entertainment released Carmageddon for PC, a controversial and groundbreaking vehicular combat game that quickly gained notoriety for its violent content. Inspired by the 1975 film Death Race 2000, Carmageddon allowed players to race through open environments, not only competing to finish first, but also earning points by destroying opponents' vehicles and running over pedestrians.
What else would you do?
Exactly. Shouldn't have been in the way, right?
Nope.
The game was praised for its innovative physics, dark humor, and freedom of choice in gameplay, but it also faced significant controversy and censorship in several countries due to its graphic content. Despite this, Carmageddon became a cult classic, known for pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable in video games at the time and laying the foundation for future titles in the vehicular combat genre.
I like that that's a genre. That's dominated by what? Twisted Metal?
I was just gonna say I'm trying to think of other outside of Twisted Metal and Carmageddon, and yeah, offhand I can't really.
There was a series called, was it Highway 76? Or something
Hmm.
like that, that was in the middle there that I played, that I'm sure I just got the name wrong. But yeah, not a big category. Someone out there is probably screaming at their radio or whatever they're listening on right now, going, "This game! I love this game!" Maybe vehicular combat includes Mario Kart.
I was just thinking at what point is it no longer vehicular combat? Because could we technically consider Wreckfest to be vehicular combat? You're
True,
smashing cars at each other.
true statement. That's a good
So
point.
just depends on where you want to draw the line.
Mm-hmm.
Next, on June 9th, 2005, Killer 7 was released in Japan for the Nintendo GameCube and PlayStation 2, introducing players to a surreal and stylistic action adventure experience. Developed by Grasshopper Manufacture and directed by Goichi Suda, or Suda51, the game follows Harmon Smith, an elderly assassin with dissociative identity disorder, who can manifest 7 distinct personalities, each of them with unique abilities. These personas, collectively known as the Killer 7, undertake missions to eliminate a terrorist group called Heaven Smile, composed of invisible, laughing enemies. The gameplay combines on rails navigation with first person shooting and puzzle solving elements, set against a backdrop of political intrigue and metaphysical themes. Killer 7 was part of the Capcom 5, a series of games intended to revitalize the GameCube's library with original content. Upon release, it received polarized reviews due to its unconventional controls and complex narrative, but has since achieved cult classic status for its bold artistic direction and storytelling. A remastered version was later released for PC on November 15th, 2018, allowing a new generation of players to experience its unique vision.
Did you ever play Killer 7?
I have not. I've heard of that one. It's one of those ones that kind of reminds me of I can't think of the name of the movie series, but it's like the glass and stuff like that, where it's just like all mental craziness.
Not sure, and I've never played it either. So I guess this chatter was for nothing.
Yeah.
Moving on.
Anywho, next up on June 14th, 2013, The Last of Us was released for the PlayStation 3, setting a new benchmark for storytelling in video games. Developed by Naughty Dog and directed by Neil Druckmann, the game followed the harrowing journey of Joel and Ellie across a post apocalyptic America ravaged by a fungal pandemic. Lauded for its emotional depth, nuanced characters, and cinematic presentation, The Last of Us received universal acclaim and quickly became one of the most celebrated games of all time. Its blend of survival gameplay and narrative maturity helped redefine what audiences could expect from video game storytelling. In episode 198, we explored its development history, delved into the career of Neil Druckmann, and examined why the game's narrative continues to resonate with players more than a decade later. So, if you want to learn more, go check that out.
Go check it out and go play it. It's a fantastic game.
Yeah, I should do that.
You should.
Last up for this week in gaming history, on June 9th, 2019, Double Fine Productions was acquired by Xbox Game Studios, marking a major turning point for the quirky, independent-minded developer. Founded in 2000 by LucasArts veteran Tim Schafer, Double Fine became known for its offbeat humor and inventive gameplay in titles like Psychonauts, Brutal Legend, and Broken Age. The studio had long operated on the fringes of the mainstream industry, often relying on crowdfunding and passionate fan support to bring its unique visions to life. The acquisition was announced during Microsoft's E3 2019 presentation, which was part of the broader initiative to bolster first party content for Xbox. While some fans feared the loss of independence, Schaefer emphasized that the deal would allow the team to focus on creativity without the financial distractions. The move also ensured stable support for the long anticipated Psychonauts 2, which eventually released in 2021 to critical acclaim. With its new home under Microsoft, Double Fine retained its distinct voice while contributing the revitalization of Xbox's first party lineup.
Rob,
Dave?
it's been 228 weeks since we last talked about Duke Nukem as a topic.
Wait, 32? Seriously?
228 weeks.
32 was the episode we did that. Or
Mm,
22. Wow.
20,
Math.
228 weeks.
You're shitting me. It was episode 22?
Go look it up.
Holy fuck. Okay.
Oh.
That's wild. I did not think it was that long.
So I think that probably warrants maybe just a few moments to revisit the origins of the Duke Nukem series in itself. So,
I'd say so.
Duke Nukem's creators, Scott Miller and George Broussard, first met in high school. And we know there that Miller specifically spent time programming text adventures on the school computers. After high school, they both took jobs at a local arcade. Miller attended college and was able to learn through both his job and schooling more about video games between the programming side and the, let's say, competitive and playing side at the arcade, right?
Right.
But school did nothing for Miller. And so after 2 years, he dropped out to focus entirely on video games. He wanted to program them, and he started playing competitively in video game tournaments. Looking to find other ways to make money off of his knowledge of video games, Miller and Broussard collectively wrote a manual style book on how to beat video games. That was literally what it was called, How to Beat Video Games. How to win at games or something like that. It didn't win, it didn't sell well. Maybe it won, I don't know. But it didn't sell well. And it earned Miller a job as a video game critic for the Dallas Morning News, as well as a few other like gaming centric publications. So he wrote about video games for a while, and after 4 years of that, Miller came to the conclusion that he was capable of creating better games than the one he was reviewing. So he quit his job wanting to develop games full time, because he thought he could do it better. So he had a modem installed in his parents' house where he was living at the time, and he began a career as a full time game developer. So he's making these, let's say, basic text adventure games with rudimentary graphics. This is the time when we were using ASCII symbols as graphics, right?
Right.
So he's making these text adventures with the ASCII graphics, and he's shopping them around the publishers. And he is just constantly rejected because the developers had no confidence in him as an unknown developer without a college degree. So he considers self-publishing his games. And at the time, there are a number of ways to do it. One that we've heard at this time period through other episodes was that you would self-publish. You would print your own discs, print your own materials, and sell them yourself. But that was risky because you had to put the money forward to print the discs and print the materials, right? But here in the mid 80s, roughly, there was slowly becoming another form of distribution available through the internet. Believe it or not, there was internet at the time. We were using bulletin board systems, BBSs, and that was something called the shareware model. Now, the shareware model had really just started a few years ago. I think 1982 or 1983 was the first time we ever saw shareware. And in its early form, it wasn't used for video games, but it was used for computer software. And essentially, software developers would make their titles available to users online, but they would include their address, like a P.O. box, so that people could voluntarily send them a suggested donation for using the software. And we kind of have that still today, in fact. It's very common with open source software that you can get for free on the internet. Most of them will have the same concept where developers will ask for donations in order, donations. You don't have to pay to use it, but we would appreciate if you would pay to use it.
Right.
And this model really appeals to the generosity of people, to have them show appreciation for the developers' efforts where they can. Now, Scott Miller tries this distribution model starting in 1986. He releases a text adventure called Beyond the Titanic, and then in 1987 he does it again with a model or a title called Supernova. And together, both of those titles earned about $10,000, right? So $5,000 a piece with these two games. And so he thought about an idea on how to go about it for a better way. And we call this the apogee model. And the apogee model is such that he would only make a fraction of the game available for free, like we called it an episode. That's where it started. This is the first episode, but there are 3 episodes to the game, and you can send me money to this address by mail, and I'll send you episodes 2 and episodes 3. Kind of like a demo, right? That's essentially what it is. It's a demo, and then you have to buy the full game. This was, in order to support this, he founded Apogee Software, and he released his next game, Kingdom of Kraz, in 1987 using the Apogee method. This proved much more successful, as Miller brought in almost $100,000 selling Kraz through this model. Quite different than the 5K he brought in on his last 2. So Miller is seeing all the success, and as he's seeing all the success, his high school friend George Broussard is releasing a few games under a company called MicroFX, but nothing really is making the same impact that Miller's Apogee software games are making. So the two combined forces, MicroFX kind of merged into Apogee. It was a time when Apogee was growing, and Scott Miller was reaching out to various people to bring him into the fold. There were other publishers, other developers that he wanted to publish. He wanted to distribute their games through the Apogee method. That included, we've talked about the story before, John Carmack and John Romero. They had been publishing their work in Gamer's Edge magazine, where they worked at the time here in Shreveport, Louisiana. And Scott Miller reached out and said, hey, let me publish one of your games as a shareware title. Well, they couldn't use anything that they had made for Gamer's Edge, so they came up with a new title for this platform, and this would become a side-scrolling platformer called Commander Keen and the Invasion of Vorticons, and that kind of started Apogee's name recognition as a leader in side-scrolling titles, so to speak, and that was the start of something great for Carmack and Romero, who would form id Software and eventually become household names when they published Doom some years later. Apogee also brought Todd Replugo and Scenario Software into the mix. He developed a side-scrolling platformer called Dark Ages. So they're bringing all these side scrollers in, and that's kind of what Apogee is known for. I was a big Commander Keen fan. I remember that, and I remember the big Apogee logo popping up every time. So yeah, they're bringing everyone in. Replago gets hired in as an Apogee employee, and he is looking to continue the company's success in the side-scrolling market after these few wins. After the success of Keen, after the success of Dark Ages, it's time for what's next, right? And so he begins working on a new side scroller. He enlists John Carmack's help to lay the groundwork. Carmack is a brilliant programmer, and Carmack helps him lay a groundwork where he gets these like 8x8 tiles scrolling very well. This gets the game to scroll, gets the game to move fluidly. It does a great thing, and so they're left with the groundwork at Apogee to create something new. And what they wanted to do was create a new action title that has a strong action character. Now, Rapago initially calls the project heavy metal, but Scott Miller hates that title, and so he suggests that they name it after the lead character. Now, after throwing about a bunch of names, Miller comes to the conclusion that he likes the name Duke because he feels that it sounds strong. And Rapago responds, okay, cool. Well, I think Nukem, therefore Duke Nukem, would make a pretty cool name. And they agree.
I gotta agree on that. It's Duke's a title. It's a big title,
It's
and
a
then you
bit.
add Nukem, and it's like, damn.
Right, right. Interestingly enough, and I will only touch on this briefly because it's not entirely relevant to the story. Duke Nukem was also a character in Captain Planet. You know the cartoon series Captain Planet?
Oh, absolutely.
There was a character in that series, I think a bad guy named Duke Nukem, spelled exactly the same way. And so after they released the first Duke Nukem title, they were worried about copyright infringement. And so they briefly changed his name to Duke Nukem with an I think it is. And then they come to find out that there is no copyright infringement on the character in the cartoon series, so they quickly revert back to actual Duke Nukem like we see it here. So there are some versions of Duke Nukem out there supposedly. I think I saw a screenshot where it's not EM, it's IM for that very reason. So the team gets together and they go to work on the first Duke Nukem game. Miller oversees its production. Rapago was one of just a handful of designers, and Broussard is on the art team. Together, they create the first Duke Nukem title, which was released on July 1st, 1991. Miller has later estimated that they sold between 60 and 70,000 copies, which was, of course, enough for the team to want to continue to develop games in the series. So, Duke Nukem 2, very similar to the first, released on December 3rd, 1993, also moderately successful. And then in 1994, Apogee decides to launch different brand names for each genre that they publish. One is called Pinball Wizards, for instance, that published pinball games. Shocking, I know.
What? No.
Crazy. For all of their up and coming 3D titles, because the mid 90s is when 3D graphics really proliferated, they settle on the brand name 3D Realms. One of the games included in 3D Realms' early titles is the next game in the series, Duke Nukem 3D, because it's both the third game and it's 3D. Aren't they amazing?
That's revolutionary.
Crazy, right? And that comes out in January of 1996. Now, that is the game that we covered early on in our podcast, episode 22. Rob played it for the first time, right?
I sure did. A
So
fun game it was.
we got to play Duke Nukem 3D. Great time. Go listen to it. Uh, that's still really early on before we were as history leaning as we are now, but you'll still learn all about it. One thing that you will learn is that Duke Nukem 3D was an absolute commercial hit. It sold about 3.5 million copies. And while the Duke Nukem series was 3D, there were still plans to continue the series in its 2D roots. There was at the time, rather, plans for a fourth game in which Duke was going to fall in love with a Russian soldier named Eva. The team had tentatively named it Duke Nukem 4 Eva,
Oh,
but the success of Duke Nukem 3D compared to earlier games in the series showed the team that 3D titles were definitely the future. So Duke Nukem for Eva becomes Duke Nukem Forever, and thus begins our story of one of the most prolonged development cycles in video game history.
I mean, you can still tell me that that was what the game was intended to be, and I would totally believe it.
You know, Rob, looking back on Duke Nukem's early days, the shareware model, reverse engineering tech, building entire games from scratch, it's wild to see how much innovation came from a small, passionate team with big ideas.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing what a couple of high school friends with a modem, a vision, and a whole lot of determination could pull off. And it just goes to show if you got something to say or a story to tell, you don't need a massive studio to get started.
Exactly. And for anyone out there who's been thinking about telling their own stories, maybe not by nuking aliens, but maybe instead starting a podcast, Zencaster makes it easier than ever to jump in and get recording.
All right, lay it on me. What makes Zencaster the Duke Nukem of podcast platforms?
Well, for one, it's powerful without being complicated. Zencaster lets you record high quality audio and video right from your browser. There's no bulky gear, no complex software setups. Just log in, hit record, and you're ready to go.
So you're telling me I could podcast in my boxers with a pair of sunglasses on and still sound pro?
Yeah, you wouldn't be the first. After you record, Zencaster's post production tools can then do all the heavy lifting. It'll balance your audio, clean background noise, and even cut out all your ums and uhs so you sound like a pro, even if you're winging it.
Nice. And once I finished my masterpiece,
Publishing is just as easy. You can push your episode out to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all the other big podcast platforms without ever leaving the Zencaster dashboard.
all right, you've sold me. And for those of our listeners that you've also sold on, where can we start?
You can just head over to zencaster.com/pricing and use our offer code, all one word, memory card lane, and you'll get 30% off the first month of any paid plan. Whether you're just starting out or looking to go faux 3D with your podcast, Zencaster's got you covered.
So if you've got a story to tell, whether it's blasting aliens, starting a business, or just chatting with friends, Zencaster can help you hit the ground running.
Absolutely. That's zencaster.com/pricing. All one word. Our offer code is memory card lane, and you'll get 30% off. All right, Rob. Now let's talk about Duke Nukem Forever, a game that took so long to come out, it practically needed its own time machine.
Let's do it, Dave.
All right. Duke Nukem Forever was announced on April 27th, 1997. I want you to hold on to that date and stick it in your pocket for later.
All right, it's in there nice and tucked away.
As you recall, Duke Nukem 3D was incredibly successful. So the company was using its profits, as well as profits from the other games, it wasn't their only successful game, to fund the creation of this new Duke Nukem title. And they turned marketing and publishing rights over to GT Interactive. Now, if you're a longtime listener and video game history aficionado, you know, like I previously just touched on, that the mid to late 90s were a period in which 3D graphics were rapidly changing.
That, and you do mean rapidly with that.
I mean absolutely rapidly. Less than a year since the after the release of Duke Nukem 3D, its graphics and its engine therefore were already out of date compared to other products on the market.
Which is crazy.
I, that's the way it was. It was an amazing period back when. Like, I personally, I know I've said this before, I am so thankful to have lived through it. Like, and it was such a formative time for me, right? Because I was a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it, oh, I would have been just getting into my teens, but you know what I meant. I don't know if we'll ever experience anything like it again. We're like literally there's like a graphical jump of significant fidelity year after year after year after year. It was awesome.
Oh, I absolutely remember. I mean, going from Nintendo 64 and then just the jump to the GameCube was a
Yeah.
huge thing. And, I still remember even past the 90s and early 2000s with the release of the Xbox 360. I remember going to the store with mom and she looks at the display they have for the new Xbox 360 and she's like, I thought that was a real video.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I
Like,
rem
it's
I
just
remember.
amazing.
Yeah, I remember those early Halo trailers where you're looking at it going, "Is that a video game?"
So, the 90s and early 2000s, that those two decade or two 10 years periods were just insane for 3D graphics. And now, you're not going to see that same change.
No.
We're to the point where everything is so hyper realistic that what do you do better? You can make yourself feel the game, which we won't get into that yet. But it's not the same. We don't ever get from those polygonal surfaces to the mesh network that's created now to create all of these amazing graphics.
Right. So again, it's a year. It's already out of date, right? And in order to make Duke Nukem Forever, they're going to have to start from scratch essentially because you can't piggyback off of your previous engine when you're already going to be behind. So rather than spend time, money, God knows how much of either one building a brand new engine, George Broussard, who is directing Duke Nukem Forever, decides to license id Software's Quake 2 engine at a cost of about $500,000, is what it cost them at the time.
Damn.
So, right off the bat, they're investing $500,000 for Quake 2. The engine isn't quite finished yet, it's about to come out. So, 3D Realms has to begin development of Duke Nukem Forever on the original Quake engine and then transition it over to, you know, to the Quake 2 engine as its features become available. They they use the same programming language, so it's just a matter of upgrading the engine features as you go along, so to speak. So the first time the world sees Duke Nukem Forever was a late 1997 issue of PC Gamer, and in it, it has screenshots from the game that are mocked up in the original Quake engine. A year later, at E3 in 1998, the first video footage of the game is unveiled, and that's actually running in the Quake 2 engine. Walking away, I will start by saying the response from the public at E3 98 is super positive. Everyone walks away impressed. They're excited for what they see. They think that the next Duke Nukem game is going to be worth its while, right? So everything is looking good as far as the press coverage and so on and so forth. But Broussard is really unhappy with the progress on the game. This leads to someone at 3D Realms on the team suggesting to Broussard that the team switch over to the Unreal Engine. We covered the Unreal Engine in episode 38. It is hard to understate how revolutionary the Unreal Engine was upon its release. Unreal.
Might be, as you say, unreal.
Unreal. Well played. Unreal was unreal. It was unlike anything we had seen up until that point. It was a jump and then some in terms of graphics at the time. And so Broussard says, "Cool, let's switch over to the Unreal Engine because it's clearly the future, right?"
Mm-hmm.
It was also better at certain things like producing open areas, like wide open areas. And Duke Nukem Forever was going to take place largely in a desert environment at the time. And so they felt that it would be better suited for their open air environments like that. So this is about 14 months or so after they make the announcement that we're making Duke Nukem Forever and using the Quake 2 engine. You know, again, $500,000. 14 months later, they make the announcement that they're switching over to the Unreal Engine. Unreal and Quake, not the same thing. So this means 14 months in the project, they're having to discard the majority of the work that they had done up until this point, right?
Right.
So we're a year and a half in, and we're essentially starting over on 80-90% of all the work that they had done so far. When this announcement was made, George Broussard basically told everyone, don't worry about it. We will be back to the same point we are now in about 4 to 6 weeks. But because they were largely starting over, this couldn't be further from the truth. By the end of 1999, Duke Nukem Forever had already missed several promised release dates, and it was far from being finished. So now we're 2 years into the development process, right?
Mm-hmm.
Employees at the studio at this point have come out and said that the development process was constantly being complicated by Broussard's desire to continually add new things to the game. In fact, 3D Realms employees began joking that they had to start preventing Broussard from playing new games because he would want to include portions of them in Duke Nukem Forever, which is freaking funny.
Yeah.
We know people like that. We've seen it in other development cycles,
Yeah, that's why you gotta step back and, it is funny, but you just gotta step back and be like, damn, that's somewhat common.
Yeah, it is. It is. Towards the end of 99, Broussard decides that he wants to upgrade to a new version of the Unreal Engine that was designed for multiplayer. There are reports from employees who said at the time that they aren't sure why, and that there wasn't really a plan for what the single player game would look like, let alone what multiplayer is going to be. And I would like to add here at this point, as someone who develops, that you have to approach developing for multiplayer in a lot of ways differently than you approach developing for single player. When you have to deal with things like synchronicity and persistent objects and all the kind of things that happen that you have to get a multiplayer server to talk back and forth on. And I don't do a lot of multiplayer, so someone out there again screaming at their stupid podcast going, this guy doesn't know what he talks about. You're right. I'm not a multiplayer guy. But I do know, and I can speak to the fact that the basis of developing for multiplayer is completely different than single player in a lot of ways, because you have to take more consideration to the fact if you'd like to reuse your code across the board.
But you also have to take into consideration that now you're not only having to control one character, there's got to be two, and they have to be controlled from different inputs. So it's a lot more that has to be processed at once.
Well, if you're doing it online, you also have to get them to talk to one another. And how do you tell a machine over the internet, where the character on one machine is? Like, how do you get them to both that's the complication, right? How do you get them both to recognize that that character is in this spot on this map on two separate machines at the same time?
Yeah, and then you take into consideration the latency with the overlying connection,
Mhm.
which, nowadays may not be as important as it was back then, but it's still a lot of things to take into consideration.
Right. Exactly. So they're 99 upgrading to a new version of Unreal with multiplayer. About this time, their publisher, who is at this point GT Interactive, as a company, GT Interactive isn't doing too well, and they're facing bankruptcy, like no money, and they're looking for someone to either merge with them or buy the company outright in order to stay afloat. And what they do is they find a partner in Infogrames who would later become part of Atari. We did a whole episode on that. If you go back through our archives, you'll find it. And in the process of this merger purchase, the publishing rights to Duke Nukem Forever get transferred over to a video game publisher called GOD, also known as the Gathering of Developers in early 2000.
Oh my goodness.
Do you know about the Gathering developers?
No, but come on, clearly they thought they were better than they were.
Well, the Gathering developers was an interesting. It didn't last very long, but it's this interesting moment where about 13, not the big publishers, but like I mean, there were some big publishers on there, but it was roughly about 13 or so publishers got together in order to like make their own consortium to have more clout. They basically all came together and they turned into their own publishing company called the Gathering of Developers. So they had publishing control over their own stuff. Um, so Gathering of Developers gets the publishing rights to Duke Nukem Forever in early 2000. In the meantime, work continues on Duke Nukem Forever. For E3 2001, another trailer is created and footage is shown to the public. And the public walks away very optimistic about all the progress that has been made on the game. In 2001, one of the founders of the Gathering of Developers dies of an asthma attack, no less.
Damn, that's
I
terrifying.
I know, right? Like that's a shocking one.
Yeah,
And
having had one of those, that's scary to know that's an option. Not an option, but a
but
possible
then it
outcome.
could happen, yeah.
Yeah.
And the company, the Gathering of Developers, and its assets are absorbed into its parent company, which is Take Two Interactive.
Oh, very nice.
In 2003, Take Two announces that they're having to write off $5.5 million dollars from their earnings due to Duke Nukem's lengthy development. And this does not make 3D Realms look good at all. And kind of starts a, let's say, tumultuous relationship between Take Two and 3D Realms. It puts the developer and the publisher at odds with one another. It's not a big team. Only about 18 people are working on the game here in 2003. Employees have said at the time that the team was still operating on a 1995 mentality before games became large team, big budget affairs. And 3D Realms, to their credit, was really still financing development on the game. But realistically, we're now what 6 years into development. It's really taking its toll on the company finances. In 2004, GameSpot puts out a report that the game has switched to the Doom 3 engine, which was revolutionary at the time, too. But when other gaming journalists try to follow up, they get no answer back from the company, so they run with that story as well. Broussard comes out a little bit later, denies the switch, but they admit that they did make some changes. They switched their physics engine from a well known one to a relatively unknown one. Don't know why. Maybe they thought it was better. And at this point, the company founder, Scott Miller, he takes a look at the game and the lengthy development and all the changes and this weird back and forth that Broussard has with the media because their relationship's not good. Now he's got this strained relationship with Take Two. That's never good when your source of money doesn't like you, right?
Right.
And he decides that maybe this game is in trouble. And so he goes to a publisher called Digital Extremes. Digital Extremes had worked on the Unreal games themselves. And he says, hey, will you take over development of Duke Nukem Forever? And Digital Extremes says, sure, we'd love to. We'd love to take on that project. And Take Two says, heck yeah, finally, someone that can wrap this up. But the team at 3D Realms says, nah, no thank you. And so it doesn't happen. In early 2006, 9 years, Broussard comes out and says that Duke Nukem Forever is basically finished. The team is in the process of pulling it all together and trying to make it fun. Reports come out about this time that Take Two renegotiates their deal with 3D Realms and they offer to take a smaller cut. Like they go from like 6 million to 4.5 million, I think is what they went down to. But they offered them up a bonus if the game can get released by the end of 2007. So we're in 2007. It's 10 years into development, and the continuous delays on the game are, I mean, they're taking its toll on the team, right? They're now wondering if it's ever going to get finished. And we're talking 10 years of development, funding this game that they haven't seen anything back. The payment for the game and structures like this is dependent on profit sharing upon release. And when you don't release a game, there's no profit to share, you know?
Absolutely.
December 19th, 2007, the end of 2007, 3D Realms releases its first Duke Nukem trailer in more than 6 years. F your game. Here's some footage, they said. It's great that we had new footage, but the game wasn't ready for the end of 2007 either. But by this point, the team was confident that the game was near completion. However, their funds had all but run out. It's estimated that 3D Realms had blown through more than $20 million of their own money at this point, and they asked Take Two for $6 million more to complete the game. According to Broussard and Miller, Take Two initially agreed to the whole $6 million, but then they only offered 2.5 when it came time to write the check.
What?
Take Two came out and said, "No, we offered you up 2.5 million up front and another 2.5 million dollars upon completion.
Well, that's a little better, but I mean, you need it
You
to
need
develop.
6." Right.
So,
Regardless of who said what, the two companies could not come to an agreement, and because of that, Broussard officially suspended development on the game on May 6, 2009. We're 12 years into the process, and he says, "Nope, no money left, done." A few days later, on May 8th, 3D Realms lays off the entire Duke Nukem Forever staff, citing a lack of funding to complete the project. Shortly thereafter, to no surprise, Take Two files a lawsuit against 3D Realms over their failure to complete the game, citing the fact that they originally paid $12 million for its publishing rights all the way back in 2000 when they took it from Infogrames. 3D Realms countered, claimed that development had not ceased, that they had laid off the team for financial reasons, and that they planned on hiring an external developer to finish the game when they were financially able to do so. And of course, the companies went back and forth over the semantics of it all, and in the end, they settled the lawsuit and it was dismissed with prejudice.
oh,
At this point, there is technically no team working on Duke Nukem Forever at 3D Realms or anywhere for that matter. But with that being said, 9 ex-employees, laid off, of course, took
hmm
Duke Nukem Forever with them. And throughout 2009, they continued to develop the game from their homes. 3D Realms, to their credit, did start reaching out to external developers. And among those external developers was Gearbox Software. Its CEO, Randy Pitchford, actually started his development career working at 3D Realms. He worked on one of the expansions for Duke Nukem 3D, and then he briefly worked on Duke Nukem Forever itself before leaving for another studio in May of 1997. Time-wise, that meant he worked on Duke Nukem Forever for like a month. So he was literally there at the beginning of this development process for the briefest of moments, right?
yeah.
He came out, proclaimed to the world that no, Duke can't die, decided that he would be there to help in Duke's time of need.
Okay.
So he agrees to provide funding and have Gearbox work alongside those ex employees who have now formed a studio called Triptych Games to support their work on the project. To his credit, Pitchford also reaches out to the president of 2K Games, which is the publishing subsidiary of Take Two, and persuades the president to let Gearbox finish the game and to give them the money to do so. They all came to an agreement, and the official development of Duke Nukem Forever was back on in fall of 2010. It was re-announced at the Penny Arcade Expo in September with a playable demo, which was the first time ever that gamers were actually able to play any content from the game.
Damn.
Gearbox ends up purchasing the Duke Nukem property from 3D Realms, and 2K Games holds on to the publishing rights because they're part of Take-Two. Triptych and Gearbox worked together to pull the rest of the game together, and they managed to do it in much, much less time than the rest of the development process.
Well, yeah, all the hard work was done, Dave. Come on.
No, it really was. It genuinely was. They have come out and said that they just put the polish on at this point. On May 24th, 2011, they announced that Duke Nukem Forever had finally gone gold after a development period of 14 years and 44 days.
That's a whole lot of fours, Dave.
At the time, it held the Guinness Book of World Records for longest development of a video game. That has since been broken twice since 2011, in case you're curious. And that, my friends, is the story of Duke Nukem Forever in development.
God damn it, no! You stole my joke!
Is that really the joke?
That was the joke. Obviously, it was so obvious, but god damn it. I waited a whole week for this bullshit.
You waited a whole week to tell that joke, and I wrote it.
Bullshit.
Well, Duke Nukem Forever came out on June 10th, 2011. Like I said, 14 years, 44 days in development. In case you're curious, the two games that have beat that, I don't remember the time, but it was first beaten by Beyond Good and Evil 2. And then a few years ago, it was beaten by a Game Boy Advance game called Kien, I think it is, that took 22 years to develop. I do remember that one.
Shit. That's
Game Boy Advance.
I mean, I know, but holy shit.
Yeah. From beginning to end was 22.
Damn.
I think that's a good place to wrap it up because talking about the development of Duke Nukem Forever is way more interesting than talking about the game itself. It didn't rate well. It didn't sell well. And part of that is likely because of how long we waited for it. You know, when you have that much hype before it, if you don't nail it, you're going to fall flat. And not only that, but in 14 years and 44 days, the culture had changed. The type of humor that Duke Nukem is, I'm not saying there's not a place for it, that type of humor, but even that type of humor has evolved. And so I think that Duke Nukem's target audience had really matured out of it, and the people that were left did know who Duke Nukem was, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, 14 years later, the people who are playing Duke Nukem 3D could have children who are 14 years. So, you know, they're so far out of it, and, you know, Duke Nukem wasn't really something you're introducing to a 14-year-old. I mean, it could be, absolutely. Let's not be wrong. Let's not pretend like we didn't play games like that at 14, but still.
Right.
You know, it, like you said, it's a different society at that point. 14 years is a lot of change.
Absolutely. So Duke Nukem Forever falls flat in its face, and so admittedly the world may need another 14-year, 44-day break from Duke Nukem before we even think about making another video game starring him.
Nice. Good one.
I know, I tried. I stole one joke, I had to get my own. That's funny that you waited a week for that and I took it.
God damn it.
I did not do that on purpose. That's what you get for not telling me the joke, so I didn't use it.
Oh well, it's okay.
Well. I know, it's all
Sometimes
right.
Sometimes you gotta be funny. And looks, you know, it can't always be in looks.
Hey, I saved it for episode 250. It's going to be another 250 before it happens again, so.
Oh, God.
All right, well, we covered a lot of bases. You know, we've talked about a lot of parts of this before. We've talked about Carmack and Romero and its software. We talked about the Unreal Engine. We talked about Quake. Have we talked about Quake? I don't know if we've done Quake yet.
We have not done Quake.
But we've talked about a lot of the stuff in here before. And of course, all of those stories are also found in our archives, which you can find on our website at www.memorycardlane.com. Rob, what else can people find on our website?
Well, Dave, you can find a calendar of our future episode topics to know what we are going to be covering in our coming weeks. All 250 of them, not quite, but in at least a few weeks. You can find a link to our Discord where you can come chat about episode topics and other gaming related content with Dave and I. You can find a link to our Patreon where you can help support us and get access to our ad free and unedited versions of our episodes. And you can find links to our social media where I am on several platforms as Rob_O_Raptor and Dave.
I can be found on various platforms as David is Wrong. Each week, we'll tell you a story relevant to the Crow Winky gaming history. In the last 250 episodes, we've done games, we've done consoles, we've done people, we've done a museum. We did Nokia as a company once.
Yeah, we did.
Snake.
Yeah, fun game. Woo! Pixels,
we
lines.
we we have covered all sorts of things. Each week, we sit down to teach you something new about the topic, what it takes from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world as its legacy. And one of the best parts about getting to do this week in, week out is when we sit down each week to do research for each episode, we learn things. And
What?
when we I know, crazy. And when
A
we
history podcast where you learn things? Come
I know, who would have
on.
guessed? Who would have guessed? When we excitedly learn things, we get excited because we know we get to teach you. So it's this fantastic cycle of teaching and learning, learning and teaching. And in celebration of that cycle, we like to talk every week about the things that we have learned. So, Rob, what did you learn today?
Well, Dave, mine's not so much what I've learned, but just something that is a really proud takeaway from this and a good message to everyone out there is that these developers were obviously passionate about this project. They lasted 14 years and 44 days from start to finish. And it might not have been the commercial success. Obviously, a changing world is going to change things, but they saw it through to the end.
They did.
A lot of money, a lot of time went into this, but they saw it through to the end, and that just goes to show that you might not be able to get things done quickly. It might take forever, but you got to keep pushing. You got to keep doing what you got to do. Find the funding, find the time to develop. But at the end of the day, it's all about completing that project.
Did they, though? Did they see it through to the end? Because they did shut it down. George Broussard. Unfortunately, this is George Broussard's legacy. He is now best known for overseeing Duke Nukem Forever and its troubled development period.
You say it, but do we not have Duke Nukem Forever?
You're right.
So it just goes to show the resilience and the dedication that some people have, and it's even if you got to shelf things for sometimes to make other things happen, you can still go back to that project. You can pick it up. You can make it better. You can modify it. Just don't give up on your dreams. Don't let your dreams be dreams.
Don't let your
Just do
dreams
it.
be dreams. For sure.
So that's it for me, Dave. It's really inspiring to see that something that was in development for so long came to fruition, and that they found ways to make it happen, even though it was a long and arduous process. So it shows the dedication and the desire to see a project through. Which for someone who can't often finish projects, it's kind of inspiring to hear that. So that's my big takeaway for the week. What about yourself?
I got a really big kick out of the fact that this was Duke Nukem for Eva at one time.
That actually was pretty good. And when you said that, it's like forever. Okay, I could see it. That makes sense.
Right.
Um,
They
it's
probably would have gotten here either way, to be fair, because Duke Nukem Forever really just gives itself, right?
oh,
Um,
absolutely.
but I do like that little transition that at one point they were like, Duke Nukem for Eva.
I
I
mean,
love
they could have called it forever and then just had it be a play on words.
Forever? Forever?
Eh, forever.
Yeah, yeah, I got it. So that's my takeaway. I think this was fantastic.
Oh,
So,
absolutely. Just again, just a great story all around. And luckily we didn't take 14 years and 44 days to tell it.
nope, just a lower less of your time.
Lower less.
Lower less. All right. Well, before I take it out of this week, looking forward to next week, is there anything you'd like to add to today's episode?
Absolutely, Dave. I'll take a quick moment to say thank you so much to everyone for listening. It means the world to us that you follow us along on our passion project. and that you may be a new time listener, you may be a long time listener, but you're here and you're wanting to learn about games, and we're happy to be the ones helping you learn. So thank you, and hopefully you're here with us for the next 14 years and 44 days.
Yes, indeed. As we wrap up the infamous saga of Duke Nukem Forever, we're reminded of how its ambitious yet troubled development became a cautionary tale for the gaming industry. Its story highlights both the risk of overreach and, as Rob said, the perseverance required to deliver a vision. So, whether you're battling aliens or reflecting on gaming history, always remember the lessons and legacies of ambition. Next week, we're trading the delayed chaos of Duke Nukem Forever for the precise intensity of Trauma Center Under the Knife.
Let's
Re-
go.
Released in 2005, this Nintendo DS classic transformed players into virtual surgeons, tackling dramatic medical cases with innovative touchscreen mechanics and adrenaline pumping challenges. Join us as we dissect the history of this unique title on next week's life saving trip down memory card lane to the thing.
Skibbidim dap 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 doo up bop bop bop.